I think Richard's focus on what the United States has done in bombing the boats off Venezuela and also on the other side of Latin America from Colombia uh, is actually now at the very center of the discussions that are taking place about Hormuz and what Iran's rights are. What does this mean for the law of the sea? There's been a lot of discussion saying, well, what Iran is doing and wanting to impose tolls is against the United States, I'm sorry, the United Nations law of the sea. But from the Iran's point of view, there is no law of the sea anymore. It started already in Venezuela with the attacks on boats, and then it's been continuing in the law of the sea, violated in the Baltics, where the NATO countries, France, Estonia, and others are seizing Russian tankers through that freeway. How do we reconcile what the United States is doing in the Baltic and elsewhere, violating Russia's free trade, and then saying, well, Iran cannot assert the control of Hormuz when the United States itself, when Donald Trump has said, we want to control the state of Hormuz. We want to be able to charge tolls to recuperate for us all the costs that we've expended on the weaponry that we've spent in Iran, fighting Iran's terrorism for fighting back against our terrorism and defending itself as terrorism. So what you mentioned, Nima, at the beginning of the show about what Vance said, how do we go back to the way things were? Well, what does he mean when he said the way things were before? He meant that U.S. controls the world oil trade and won't will impose sanctions against people trading with Venezuela before the U.S. invasion, with Russia since 2022, and Iran before finally the U.S. Released it, and trade in U.S. dollars. Now, especially Treasury Secretary Vance has been in the forefront of explaining that all of this is connected. He said, we have to control the world trade in oil from Venezuela, Russia, and Iran in order to preserve the dollar system, that is above all. And but we not only control the world trade in oil, it must be priced in dollars, and the dollars must be kept in United States financial system, just as Venezuela's oil export proceeds are now kept in a bank account in Miami under Trump's control. The Vance and the U.S. authorities and Besant have said, Iran's, if we give any money under the memorandum of understanding to Iran for the savings that America has seized or directed its allies to seize in the Emirates, for instance, then these savings must be invested in the United States in dollars, and most of it should be spent in the United States. And what he said is, we're going to have our people in Doha sitting right there he said, quote, the U.S. Treasury will have people sitting in Doha overseeing that transfer, how the money is allocated, and a very large percent of it will go to buy U.S. foodstuffs and medicines. So we will be recycling the money back into U.S. products, but it will be overseen by Treasury in the Middle East. Well, what Besant has expressed as openly as the linkage between America's drive to monopolize the oil trade, to preserve the dollar financial system as the key, and the use of the military, because he pointed out that how do we know that the other countries are going to, how do we force them to invest their money in the U.S. dollar? Well, he said, the U.S. has a wonderfully broad financial market, and it's large, and so it's easy for people to trade in. But then what he said is, look what we've done to the financial market. We've seized Venezuela's gold and through the Bank of England and money. We've had our European allies confiscate Russia's savings in the Euroclear, and we've seized Iran's money. The U.S. financial system has been weaponized and is a threat to all other countries, and that is why they are afraid of pricing their oil in dollars and by doing so, having to keep their oil export proceeds and their national wealth in general in U.S. dollar form. What you're seeing in the last week or so over the Americas' explanation of why it has to control any money that's given to Iran, including its oil export proceeds, has to be seen as part of, as Richard would say, America's desperate attempt to somehow maintain the good old days. And it's sort of like an old, crippled man reminiscing about his lost youth. Wouldn't it be nice to go back to the way things were? Well, Iran says it can't go back. And the question open for the rest of the world is, well, if it can't go back, how is it going to go forward? And Iran says, well, it can't go forward under the existing law of the sea that would technically not let us collect tolls through Hormuz without the agreement of Oman, which has the right to let people go through its territorial waters. There have to be, there's a higher principle, as I think Abraham Lincoln talked about on the eve of America's Civil War. And that higher principle than the existing international law written under basically U.S. Western direction is what's really at stake. And so we're opening up the whole discussion beyond Iran to take to include Russia, Venezuela, and the whole the Americans' control of the seas extends to Trump's desire to conquer Greenland and beyond it, Iceland, to prevent other countries, Europe and Asia, from having access from the Atlantic to the Arctic Ocean, to go that route. What's at issue is who's going to control the world trade routes. And what Bessent and Trump have said very clearly is, if we're going to if we're going to have the chokehold on other countries and their economies that we need by controlling the oil trade, by controlling the world dollar system, and controlling the sea trade, we have to control Greenland, Iceland, the Baltic, the Strait of Hormuz, and other parts of the sea, which is why they drove Chinese investors out of its position in the Panama Canal. This is the big declaration of war against the rest of the world. And so it's really a war, an undeclared war, and other countries seem flummoxed over what to do. And Iran has not made it explicit that this is what it is behind what it's doing, but I think it should. It should do what Abraham Lincoln did, talk about the higher power.
If I could add, let me go back again one more time to those fishermen that get blown away by Americans. Before the last, I don't know how many months this has been going on, but let's say 8 or 9 months. Before that, the American Navy, observing at least to some extent the law of the sea that Michael refers to, if it had a reason to believe a boat, large or small, was engaged in the drug trade that is illegal, it would stop the ship, it would board the ship, it would inspect the ship. If it found the contraband, it would take that ship and put it to a port, either an American port or the port it came from. There would be legal procedures, court trials, all the rest of it. Something happened to make years and years of practice doing that become instead lawless extremity, violating all of the existing rules. And as I've tried to show you, executing people who, had they been caught for drug trade in the United States and given a trial and had a lawyer and had a judge and been found guilty by a jury, they would have been imprisoned and punished. They would not have been killed. Instead, we killed them without the procedure. Now, that is very extreme, but it's an extremity that teaches the following lesson. Any Gulf country that uses its dollar revenues, which they all do, and uses a large portion of them to buy securities issued by the United States Treasury, runs the risk of a parallel change in procedure. Scott Bessent will get on the telephone to his counterpart in Bahrain and say, we are not happy with the decision you've just entered into with Iran. So you can kiss your loan to the United States Treasury goodbye. It's confiscated, and it's an act we have the right to do, because if we have the right to kill fishermen in boats that we haven't put through a legal procedure, we have the right to take your money. Get lost. You have nothing. What are they going to do? Under the current rules, the United States could say, we are effectively at war with Bahrain because they've made a deal with Iran. That's, by the way, what they said. We are effectively at war with those fishermen because there's a war against the drug trade. I mean, they're playing loose and free with the language to get around the law. A very old gambit. We are in the position, if Michael is right, that we are forcing countries to lend us money. That's not a loan anymore, friends. That's called tribute. You can call it spaghetti. It doesn't matter what you call it. It matters what you are doing. You're forcing those people to give you the money which you feel free to repay or not. You used to say, well, that's not a worry because you couldn't afford the message you send to the rest of the world. But the United States is desperate. It can't afford the message it sends by killing those fishermen. It can't afford the message it sends by losing a war with Iran. But what options have they got? They have very, very few left. The Gulf states are figuring out, I believe the foreign minister of Saudi Arabia is either in China as we speak or on his way. Why do you think that might be? What is it exactly that the Gulf states have to discuss with China? And the answer is to get out from under the United States. That's what their objective is. You don't include Europe because they're not relevant anymore. They're even more desperate than the United States. So who cares? Nobody cares anymore. Europe's disaster. And what is it all part of? It's a decline of the Western Empire. It's over. They've lost the empire. They don't know how to build an economy without an empire. You can understand that. They've had several centuries in which ripping off their empire was a crucial part of their life. The United States does it informally. They all did it formally, but it's over. You can't do it. That's what Iran is teaching the world. You can't keep doing it. Eventually, the people you do that to figure out how to stop you from doing it. And we don't face that. We practice denial coupled with desperation. And that's what we're watching. We are living through the disintegration of the Western dominance of the world. And it's going to take ugly forms and twists and turns. But it's important to remember what the larger procedure is. Otherwise, you get lost in the details. And paying attention to what Mr. Trump says from one day to another is to misunderstand. That's not the clue. That's the symptom. You need to do the analysis, because this is pathology on display, as is almost everything else. I mean, we are, if I may be allowed, for your audience, many of them know that the President of the United States is now covered by two kinds of headlines. One headline focuses on the celebration of the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution by producing an open-air replica of a state fair. A state fair is a relic of the agricultural history of the United States. State fairs normally happen at the end of the summer, around harvest time, as a kind of celebration common to many cultures around the world, that when the fruit of the earth is collected for the survival of the community, there's a celebration of all that the earth enables us to have to live. But for a country that has long since relegated agriculture to 1 or 2 or 3% of its economic system, we are an urban, suburban, industrial service economy. Is there no better way to celebrate than a kind of nostalgia notion? And then, of course, by doing it in the middle of the summer instead of the autumn, it's too hot and nobody goes. Today in Washington, the temperature is off the chart. The photographs of this great state fair show it to be empty. It is a joke instead of a reality. And the other headline we get today is about the personal wealth. Mr. Trump was able to manipulate the cryptocurrency market to make $1 billion, even while his fellow investors were fleeced of their money by him. And with big smile, he's made another $1 billion. That's America today. It is a desperate, desperate effort of those at the top to hold on while the ship is sinking. It is extraordinary. The biggest billionaires are. Mr. Thiel just bought a house in Argentina. He knows he has to get out. He knows the ship is sinking. He moved his family as far away from Silicon Valley as you can get. And others are buying mansions in remote parts of New Zealand and Australia. What is this? This is a society officially denying what each in their own individual way are taking account of and reacting to. And for the rest of us, for the majority, we better understand and stop this process before it takes us all down with it.
Yeah. Well, Richard, I think there's some a good side, the appropriate side of this state fair celebration on July 4th. It's going to be held right near the algae-filled pool near the Lincoln Memorial. It's stuffed with algae because Trump gave the contrast to fill it, fix it all up to a convicted felon who had been a partner of his way back from his real estate days. And this is part of his payoff for to friends. So it was a giveaway, again, at taxpayer expense, buying support by throwing federal business their way. Sounds like a whole metaphor for me. If people are it's going to be a hot day, the algae is going to be smelling, and people are going to be marching and breathing deeply. But besides that, I think what you've done is spell out the broad dynamic of all of this that is the context for what we're seeing in Iran right now. And the context is really, as you pointed out, it's the end of the Western colonial order that was locked in the 19th century with the fight for colonies, locked in by the subsequent financial colonialism of getting all of these colonies to borrow money, and the newly independent political countries, from Haiti to Greece to Mexico to Egypt to Tunisia to Brazil, all these countries that had borrowed money, fallen into debt, and then found that the great powers had sent gunboats to put creditor control over their financial system, to take control of their finances, to make sure that the foreign creditors get paid. One of the problems that Nima just mentioned at the beginning was Lebanon. Look at Lebanon. Lebanon is the perfect example of what is obsolete in this order. It was carved up in the middle of World War I by the French and British, that gave control to the French over Lebanon. Well, by the middle of World War II, 1943, when Lebanon was ruled by the Nazi, the fascist Maronite Phalange party, the French said, "Well, it's time for you to become independent and have a new constitution, which we're going to arrange." The head of the head of Lebanon must always be a fascist Maronite Christian. The second in charge must be a Sunni representative, and the Speaker of the Parliament, the least important position, will be a Shia. The Shia and the Lebanese Christians got together and said, the Sunni and Lebanese Christians have got together and wanted to join Israel's extermination against the Shia. And this is all the Shia. Now you've had a sharp decline in the Christian population of Lebanon. They've moved out. The Sunni population isn't increasing much. It's the Shia population in the south that has risen to dominance in not only among the voters, but in the Lebanese legislature. But the Constitution won't let it be elected. That's the kind of anti-democracy that the West misshaped when it carved up the whole West Asia in the wake of World War I's ending of the Ottoman Empire. It was to have been carved up between France, Britain, and Russia, but you had the 1917 Russian Revolution, so Russia was left out. And you've had all of these ethnic conflicts that you're seeing right now, the drawing of borders, specifically cutting across ethnic and religious lines, precisely to set to make everyone a minority in their country, to set all of these groups against each other so that they wouldn't join together to say the Western order that has created this mess is over. So I don't think there can be any ultimate solution of the fight against Iran without essentially rewriting the Iranian constitution. That requires essentially Iran to back the Shiite majority there to take over. Seems to be such a problem that it's more than a problem, it's a quandary. There's no way out without some kind of violent, a civil war. And there's going to be civil war, I think, throughout the Emirates. One of the key player in this, I think, is going to be Saudi Arabia. You've seen in the last few days all of the reports coming out that America had planned to attack Iran a few weeks ago, and Saudi Arabia was told of this, or got wind of it one way, and said, you cannot use our air bases in Saudi Arabia to attack Iran, because these air bases are not protecting us. They're making us unprotected against Iranian retaliation, because the weapons you sold us don't work. The protective missiles and radar don't protect us. The weapons of attack don't work. We have to turn to Iran, Russia, and China for weapons that work. You're not come here. And according to the New York Times report, the airplanes, Trump's airplanes, had to turn back and were not able to attack Iran. Much different is the situation of the Emirates with Dubai and the other countries. How long can the Emirates, that have tied all of their economic hopes to the United States and its financial markets, remain as a U.S. ally and Israeli ally against Iran, against what is essentially becoming the global majority? I don't see how there can a civil war from Lebanon to the Emirates can be avoided as part of the backwash from all of this. I think we're just beginning to see these dynamics that have been set in motion by Trump's attack to try to maintain American power is creating a destabilization that's finally going to lead not only the West Asian region, but the whole world to say, we really do need to create an alternative to the U.S. order. How are we going to do it? Well, you've recently seen India and Japan throw in their lot with the United States. India, in all practical purposes, has withdrawn from BRICS and said our loyalty is to the U.S. and Israel, and that leaves a very large part of the BRICS cut out. South Africa is in a mess. It's really up to China, Russia, and Iran to take the lead and begin spelling out just what kind of order they want. And I don't see much work in this. And all that Richard and I can do is to spell out what the internal logic seems to be.